earliest memory of wanting to work in healthcare probably comes from like when I was a teenager and trying to figure out what I want to do in life. And I really found the human body really fascinating. And I decided that I wanted to go down that route. And that route was very convoluted, and there was lots of rejections and acceptances and lots of meanders in that pathway. Eventually, when I was 25, I sort of faced a quarter-life crisis where I'm like, I don't think I actually fully consented to any of the decisions I made. And not consented, but more like I wasn't really fully informed. And I felt that I didn't really delve into what I wanted to do and what my values were and how I wanted to like spend the next 30, 40 years of my working life. And when I sat down and thought, what are my values and what are the skills that I really want to learn and implement in my work, it just came to midwifery. I never sat down. I never like had a stroke of brilliance and thought I want to be a midwife. It just happened. It sort of naturally evolved. And I still remember the day I found out I wanted to be a midwife. I was alone by myself, like on the NHS website, and I just had like a little shout of, a little exclamation of joviality because I was so happy to have found what I really wanted to do. Yeah, I was very happy that day. My training was emotionally, physically, mentally exhausting. It was a struggle. I felt that I was obstructed by a tide of oppression, a tide that like I really wanted to learn, and I was very keen to learn, and I felt that I was just faced by resistance and just yeah, resistance, a huge tide of resistance. And I felt like I had to swim 3 times hard while learning how to swim just to get to the end. And that's due in part because the trust that I was training at was quite underfunded, and the midwives were very stressed and they had a very high workload, but also that there wasn't really a fixed ethos of how to train students and how to prioritize their learning. It was rather, we've got a student, it's an extra body, they can do the obs, they can fetch the drugs, they can take the blood. It wasn't really like, it wasn't a consolidated learning at all. The majority of the learning that I did and I'm still doing is on my job. I did feel that I faced racism of a systemic kind, and also I think there were a couple individuals that were in their journey of understanding, shall we say, and those individuals made it quite difficult to A, get your learning, and B, get justice when you complained about it. I still remember a day where we had a meeting about the training at my hospital, just not just me, but other student midwives that were training at this particular hospital. And I mentioned that there was a lot of white privilege, and the head of midwifery turned around and said, oh, that's a privilege, white privilege is a perception. And I was like, all right, there's no point. I just like, felt really no point. But also my fellow students didn't join me in exposing this. And that's probably because there's a lot of repercussions and vulnerability as a student, and it just made it harder when you're the only one actually saying out loud what's going, what the problems are. There was a lecturer that told me to take my, so while I was training, we had a tunic and it came up a bit higher up on my sleeves, and I would wear a top underneath and I'd roll it up to my elbows when I was at practice. And there was a meeting, not in a clinical space, and I had my sleeves rolled up, and I asked the lecturer to sign a document to say that I had attended the meeting. And she said, I'm not going to sign that until you take your top off. And I was like, I don't do this. I'm really uncomfortable to do that. And she was like, well, we've just had a meeting. We've just talked about uniform policy because obviously no one really cares about your learning. It's all about what you're wearing and how you present yourself to the world. And that's apparently professionality and respectability, not actually what you're learning and how you think or develop. But anyway, I said that I'm very uncomfortable to do that because I do this for religious purposes. It's already a compromise to raise my sleeves up to my elbow. I don't see a reason why I should expose any more. And I think she didn't really know what to do. And also I think she was quite focused on policy and, I am a lecturer and I follow the rules and I have to exemplify that I follow the rules, that every other kind of critical thought just escaped her. And she said to me, right, I'm going to give you an hour to take your top off. If you don't, then I'm going to email the dean of midwifery and say what you've done. And I was so furious, I just said, that is unjust and I will fight injustice. And she was obviously quite shocked because I don't think she's ever had a student say that to her. And I left and I went home. I didn't take my top off. I left and didn't get the meeting signed. And I emailed the dean of midwifery myself. And that was the start of a journey. The university didn't really I was disappointed. I was so full of hope that they would accept change and be open to have contributions by their students to change the culture, because that's what they preach. They want people that think and are courageous and confident, but they don't really. Anyway, so I didn't get a good response from them. They actually changed policies to make it more difficult for students. They said, okay, you have to wear 3/4 sleeves. You have to go and buy all these things. The students are already really financially really in a difficult space. I'm not going to go and buy more tops. And I didn't change my practice. I just carried on because whatever. Because sometimes policies they're not there for you. They're not there for the people. They're made by people in power, usually white people that don't really. That haven't had to think about what it's like to be a person of colour or even condescend to think about it, and are just happy to just maintain their own status of power. So this same lecturer had marked my essay and failed it, and I was furious because I put a lot of work into my essays. I had never had an essay failed in my life, except a GCSE poetry exam that doesn't matter at all. And I knew the quality of my work. I knew what it was worth. I refused to have my hard work and efforts insulted in this way. So I complained about it. I was just given the bog standard answer to any student that was upset that their essay was failed. It wasn't treated with any investigation or any consideration. So I was just really, really angry. And I wanted to prove that it wasn't worth what it was marked. So I went to the British Journal of Midwifery and I got it published. And I was very, very pleased with myself. And I learned from that experience that sometimes it's not even about the mark, it's about what you can contribute to your community. And even through that ugly, dark time, something beautiful can be fruited from it. The white privilege and the systemic racism that I had noted did happen before the incidences that had affected me directly. And because I'm quite vociferous in how I speak, I had always made it quite apparent, especially when we're having lectures or sort of group meetings. And always the person of authority would always say yes, and white privilege is also a human factor, and be open to listening to the students, and appear welcoming. But when I challenged it and said, look, the majority of white students are in the birth centre where everything is nice, low risk, and you get wonderful births and really relaxed environment. And a lot of other black student midwives are having 9 weeks of nights, purely night shifts, not being paid, just having a really high risk environment with, mentors that are not always supportive. there is a disparity here, and when it's not like in print, it's really difficult to prove it, because Britain is quite a bureaucratic country and everything. They love paperwork, so you feel even more insecure when you're trying to challenge it. When I did challenge it, it was just met with disregard, frankly, and that's one of the reasons why I knew I never wanted to stay in my hospital, in my training hospital, because I felt that it was not a safe place emotionally for me to be. I had one mentor she wasn't white and she wasn't a bad person, but me and her, we just did not work. We did not clash. We clashed. We did not work together. I did not learn a single thing from her. All I felt was fear. I'd come into my shift just to get my hours done, knowing I'm not going to learn anything. I'd come into my shift crying, and I complained to the university 3 times, and they just said, you have to be more confident, you have to communicate better, and just the lack of support was almost allocated for the students of color, because when the white midwives complained, I think they were. They were not always resolved, the complaints, but at least they were listened to a bit more. And there were other lecturers that said inappropriate things about African countries and about countries of low income and what birth is like there, and just needing more understanding, needing to broaden your knowledge about life and beyond your boundaries. When I started working as a newly qualified midwife, I was also pregnant. It was the right time for me. It happened a bit earlier than I'd hoped, but I was very happy to be pregnant. When I came to work, I was allocated mostly on the postnatal ward, and I was very happy there. I mean, it took me a while to pick up the system, and I definitely made mistakes. But after 3 months, I was actually nominated Midwife of the Month by the women and their partners, and that made me really, really happy. Unfortunately, I got quite unwell because I was pregnant, so I had to leave. So I had to leave and be on maternity leave a bit early. When I came back, I was allocated to be on labour ward, and I had had a traumatic birth myself at the place where I give birth, at the place where I work. So at my workplace, I gave birth. I had a traumatic birth. A year later, I came back. I had one supernumerary shift where I was shadowing another midwife. And I was made to work on the shop floor straight away. And inevitably, mistakes happened. I became overwhelmed. Midwives talked about me. I still don't know what they said. And without any warning and without context, I was made to be under a supervised plan. So I would be, they create an action plan, which to me was insufficiently succinct, because it was quite vague, and it was skills that you learn as a newly qualified midwife, like prioritizing and communicating and like knowing when to escalate. And they expected me to know how to do everything on the get-go, and I hadn't really been on labour ward for 2 years. And I was really upset, and I did say to them that I feel that I've not been supported enough. And my line manager was like, yeah, I agree it's not been fair on you, but we're here to support you, and this is all informal. But I went home and I felt something in my soul saying something's not right. Something's not right, and I don't know what it is, because everyone's smiling behind those words and saying, that this is all going to be great for you. But how could it be great for you if you have to prove your improvement, and everyone's saying, do you enjoy labour ward, which is code for, I don't think you should be here. And just like keeping your sense of self intact, and not believing everything that's being said to you, and not falling into that crevice of not insecurity, but of disbelief in yourself. It was really hard to just stay focused on just belief that I was not supported well enough, that it's not actually my fault. that I am doing my best, not that I am inherently wrong. From my reflections and from the communications I've had with people, I think there's been an assumption that I am just stupid. That because I've made stupid mistakes, I have made stupid mistakes. I am stupid. And I think that comes from a racism where we would assume a brown or black person to be stupid for making stupid mistakes. For a white person, we would say they're having a rough time. And when I said to them, this would not have happened to me had I been white, the answer was, there isn't any evidence to say that there's been any racism involved. However, I'm not saying that there hasn't been any racism. So it was very diplomatic. And I've been really, really upset. And it's probably because I came in with so much hope that I'm going to be in a place which is, well funded, the staff are more relaxed, and people are invested in your learning. But actually, I've just been used as another body. And I'm such a multitude of emotions now. I've come through my supervisory period. It's gone from the only way I could. So halfway through, I was performing worse than I was before my supervisory period had started. And I had said this to them, and I just explained everything. I just word vomited everything. I was like, you guys are just giving me diplomatic answers. You guys are not listening to me. This is humiliating. This is degrading. This wouldn't have happened to me had I been white. And the answers were very controlled. You could tell they were very controlled. So I don't really know what they were truly feeling, because I was just but they could have been trying to de-escalate the situation, considering I was so emotional. And the only way I could they told me just, keep asking for feedback. But what I did was just act like I wasn't on supervision after that. I just acted like I was not being watched. And I got through it. And at the end, oh, Fatimah, you've had such improvements. And, everyone said such wonderful things about you. And I felt something inside me deaden. That truly, how could you after 14 shifts, how can you go from absolutely incompetent to such an amazing midwife? It's not possible. And they're not seeing that. And also they're not seeing how patronizing it is to be told the improvements you've made have been vast, when I'm trying to say in the first place, you would not support me efficiently enough. So how can you say I've made so much improvements? It's almost validating your decision to put me on supervision. So I didn't want to let them get away with it. And I went through an informal grievance process, and I got some union representation who have been supportive, but I think they're kind of learning how to support me. So I kind of felt things could have been a bit better in certain ways, but for their first time, it's not so bad. And the result of the grievance process is, Fatimah, the decision to put you on, it's not supervised practice, because we don't have supervisors of midwives anymore. So, you were put on an informal supervisory support plan. I'm like, really angry that you're not acknowledging the humiliation that I had to go through, and the degradation of it, and also the truncation of my confidence that comes with being watched all the time. Basically, I just felt really unacknowledged, and I was very upset by that lack of acknowledgement, because I felt this horrible thing happened to me. I'm going to try and change it so that it doesn't happen to other midwives. But if you're not acknowledging what went wrong and the consequences, the very concrete consequences that those decisions had created and led to, then you're not going to make any meaningful change. And I was right. They've not decided to make meaningful change. I've asked for more transparency in how communications are made about concerns about midwives and their competency. That transparency has not been requested. It's been said to me that midwives need to feel comfortable to escalate a concern if they see another midwife practicing practicing inefficiently, and the gold standard is that they talk to the midwife, but not many midwives are not comfortable, might not feel comfortable to do that. So there needs to be a process. So emailing behind their back, not including the midwife of concern in the email, is the way to go. We already have a reporting system. It's called Datex, and it's done anonymously. And it means that the person that the Datex is written about gets to be informed, not have all of this secretive policing of midwives. I am no longer, I don't feel safe to be at my place of work, and I feel that in my future I have to leave. I don't feel safe to practice anymore. I can't, if I feel, if like yesterday, I was caring for a lady and I was not happy with how the decision for her birth to happen. I wasn't really happy about the doctor's plan for her birth, and how it was communicated, and how very pressurized and short amount of time there was. But I felt scared to challenge it, because if I challenge it, are they going to write an email about me saying that I'm not competent? And in that, and when you're like one of the very few black and brown midwives in an institute that's majority white, that fear is quite acute. And I truly believe that this wouldn't have happened to me had I been white. And I feel that there's a lack of understanding of what it means to, of racial interactions at work, because the person that I channeled my grievance to asked me a question which highlights quite a lot to me. She said to me, the people that were writing emails about you, do you think that they were all white? And I said to her, no, not necessarily, because I have my own assumptions, but I don't want to say those assumptions are in case I'm wrong. But also, if it was a brown person that wrote something about me, a black or brown person, that doesn't necessarily mean that they also are not metastasizing systemic racism. It's in all of us, because it's not a moral thing. It's all of us, because we're all conditioned to be racist. So on reflection, I thought, why did she ask me that question? Why did she ask me that question? It was probably because she was trying to defend her staff, thinking, oh no, not just the white ones. No, probably, other people, and it just think, not just, it's very limited, that understanding that just white people are racist. No, we're all propagating to a racist structure. And if you're not willing to acknowledge that and change it, make meaningful change, then I don't feel safe to work as a junior under you anymore. There is definite hierarchies in the NHS, because it was formerly based upon the British military when it was first established. So obviously there will be hierarchies, and Britain is a very classist country, so there is definitely class structure in the NHS. But within that class structure, there is also racial divides. So you'll find that, we've got lots of, in London, we've got lots of black and brown doctors and stuff, but the majority of cleaning, domestic staff and catering staff, they are brown. Like, I've not seen a single white one. And in those, in that vulnerability, in those stratas, they face vulnerability that, say, me as a midwife doesn't face. Me as a midwife propagates. And it's because I'm conditioned, and I've been educated to treat people who are lesser than me, not lesser than me, but treat people who are earning less than me and seemingly doing less skilled work than me as inferior. And it just comes out, it leaks out of your character, it leaks out of your body when you communicate. It's pernicious, it's there, but it's not spoken of, and it's not documented, which makes it hard to prove. I would say that in the stratas of like professional stratas, so like midwives and doctors, there are battles where there are black and brown midwives finding it so much harder to prove their worth, having to work 20 times harder, seeing their white counterparts get it easier, get it younger, and be told that you've just got to work, you've just got to you're brilliant, but we'd love you to apply again later. So it's that insidious lack of openness, and hence when you have that lack of openness, you have a rife hole for denialism. When COVID started to happen, I was on my maternity leave. I had just given birth. And I initially didn't really know how to to think about it, really. I remember feeling scared for my family and for me and my husband and my daughter, and then scared about going back to work, feeling grateful that I wasn't at work because I couldn't even imagine what it was like for my fellow colleagues to work under such a stressful environment, with women who must feel very vulnerable. And I heard such horror stories of women not having their partners with them, women having C-sections in case there's an infection, a infection from the mother passing to the baby. Because of the lack of understanding of what COVID was at the time, there was a lot of paranoia, and there was a lot of fear and decisions based upon those fears. And unfortunately, there's a lot of women who had really traumatic birth experiences because of that. When I went back to work, it was just before the second wave hit, and I was scared. I was very scared. I really didn't want to catch anything, and I didn't want to pass on anything, and I didn't. The testing system was not really established then. Shortly afterwards, we had staff testing, but even then, they were not really. It wasn't really. It wasn't as accurate as the lateral flow test. It wasn't as accurate as a PCR. It wasn't really robust, the system. And I was also just like, how am I going to work 12 and a half hours with a mask on? Turns out that's actually the least of your concerns. It's actually quite possible to work 12 and a half hour shifts with a mask on. You'd forget it's there. But it's really important as midwives that we communicate not just with our language, but with our bodies, our faces. So our brains are hugely connected to faces, and we learn a lot we pass so much communication through our faces. So I was worried about having that obstruction and not being able to communicate concisely or effectively. Or at least show kindness in your face, because language doesn't always show kindness, like your face really does show kindness, and how to reassure women that way. The eyes tell a lot, actually, so I'm quite grateful for that. But the systems were, when I first came to work, I was kind of bombarded by new systems and COVID and fears and stress, and then other people's stress, and then my own mistakes happening, and then this whole supervisory period happening. It was too much. It was really too much. Fortunately, because of my fear, I would tell the coordinator, look, I'm asthmatic, I'm a person of color, I have a baby at home, please don't allocate the COVID ladies to me. I'm too scared to do that. And thankfully, they really did. They did consider that, and I was very grateful for that. But also, the trust that I was at is not very suburban, so you didn't actually have many. You had more women with COVID coming up to other hospitals than mine. So I think we were quite privileged that we didn't face the full brunt of that pandemic like other hospitals did. Other hospitals, I think, had to deal with a lot more. So the risk assessment I had was over the phone, and the advice by the occupational therapist, she said, would it be possible for you to be not patient-facing? And I was like, unfortunately, that is just not possible. That is absolutely not possible. We did have PPE. We were quite, I think, by the time I came, because I wasn't there at the beginning, by the time I came, there was PPE, and there was an established system. So there was doors in between the wards, when before there wasn't closing doors between the wards. And there was PPE, and in fact I think sometimes some staff didn't use it enough. I think so. We were given goggles, but the goggles will always steam up and you can't really see through them. So it would have been better to have a different type of protection. We had visors, but visors were really warm. So we're talking about 12 and a half hours in a room with a woman and their partner. It was it was really difficult to work with. We all had to be mask fitted for FFP3 masks, but they were so big and chunky. I myself, I couldn't breathe through them because I'm asthmatic, and it just felt like an extra obstruction to breathe through. Um, but then we changed to a different type of mask, but it wasn't. It was okay. We were very privileged. We had enough of what we needed. I think things could have been better. Like we could have had a better system to change masks if we were going through different rooms, or maybe yeah. Um, but rather, I think what really scared me was that the fact that we were not the women and their partners. It took ages for us to get women to be tested. Then it's only recently that we're getting partners tested. We should have had much more testing. We should have had us being tested. We should have had the partners being tested. We should have had the women being tested promptly and repeatedly. It was all very sluggish. It was all very delayed, and it was definitely. I'm trying to think of the word. Overdue. Very overdue. There was a scary time where we would get emails that would be sent to the entire trust saying, "Oh, this person has passed away. This staff has passed away. Staff member has passed away. Just want to say condolences." I'm like, they would never say, "Oh, it's from COVID," but it's kind of scary that quite a few of those were disseminated out. Um, but I think I was quite fortunate that I didn't experience that firsthand, and that I came later. But for those who were there already, it was very difficult for them. And also, like, just not being able to have a outlet to relax. So not restaurants being closed, libraries being closed, shops being closed, meeting out in public. It was just, it was really difficult. The thing is, because I had a baby just before the pandemic, I knew what it was like to be isolated and just like have no one to talk to and be constantly busy and constantly stressed, and constantly tired. That when the pandemic hit, I'm like, oh, everyone now is having a postnatal experience because everyone's stuck in their homes and no one could communicate, and like you're not getting enough adult communication and but not being able to see your friends and your family and your loved ones, that just culminated a stress, and that was cumulative, and you bring it to work, you really do, and it makes work harder when your mental health is being diminished, in essentially. I felt that the NHS staff as a whole were treated like lambs to slaughter, and that it's fine. And considering like there's a lot of people of color in the NHS, I think this is, to me, it echoed India and how my grandfather fought for the British Army in World War II, promising for independence, not getting independence, not getting dignity. And I felt that here we are again, just getting people, just telling them you've got to go to work. They don't have a choice in the matter. And you know what? We are trained to sacrifice ourselves, which is something I really dislike. We should be trained to negotiate. We shouldn't be trained to just give up our time, our extra hours, our breaks. No, we should be accordingly compensated. We should be protected. It was all very delayed, and I think in that regard, if we were bankers, if we were making loads of money, this wouldn't have happened. They would have protected the bankers' health. It's the NHS staff who we treat as disposable. We can get more. We can import them. It's all right. We don't have to fund their training. They know, so the government is no longer funding their training. The students are having such a difficult time because they had the choice to opt in or out during the pandemic. A lot chose to opt out, obviously for safety reasons, but that means they've got less time to catch the babies they need to catch, to do the hours they need to do to prove their competencies. And they've just been in a really vulnerable, tight spot. At least I'm being paid for my work, but the students aren't. When I saw people clapping, I felt proud that people appreciated us in a simple way, because like sometimes just those little things mean a lot, communicate something that words can't. Um, and there was a beauty in that, but also there was such a disgusting there was such a disgusting disregard to how the NHS had been treated for the 10 years prior under austerity measures. It was almost like, well, the NHS are brilliant, they're brilliant. They're not actually like working to the bone, already under stress. And then I thought there would be hope for their pay. But no, we're not getting the 15% increase that we are entitled to and that we should get. We're given less than inflation. So essentially we're getting a pay cut. And it's like, and the media and the way the headlines have written about it, it's just appalling. It's really appalling. Like you'd think there would be more public outcry actually, but because it seems like a socialist leftist thing, there's not that much political will behind it, especially under this current government. When we saw George Floyd being like the most watched lynching, when we saw his lynching and his murder and the evilness of it all, he couldn't breathe. And that was quite synonymous with a lot of what people were feeling during the pandemic, because they had family members, people themselves not being able to breathe. I know what it's like to not be able to breathe as an asthmatic. You take air for granted. And it is when you cannot breathe, there is desperation and fear interlinked. And not just interlinked, it's woven in that in the very air that you breathe, because the more you need it and the little that you get, the more you realize you're not getting enough. And to see George Floyd being suffocated, that just strikes such a nerve in your humanity to breathe, because breathing is like, from the very moment of birth, when you see a baby breathe, the relief that comes with it is just beautiful. And it is a tide and cadence that happens every single moment. You're always breathing. And to see someone not purposely being obstructed to breathe, that it strikes such a chord in your humanity and in your soul. You really feel the evilness of it all. And I think in that moment, that the denial of, the fact that Black lives are not mattered as much as every other life, you couldn't deny it anymore. You couldn't, if someone denied it, it was akin to that evil, really. And so it just made you feel so much more acutely the injustices that happen to your friends, to your family, to your communities, and also to yourself. And it really, if George Floyd died because of racism, and if people in Palestine are resisting in the face of the right to exist, then I can fight for the relatively smaller injustices that I'm experiencing, because they all add up to account for, they will add up to try and challenge your humanity and your right to be fully human in the eyes of those who have power, which are white people. There is a group at my workplace that had formulated and synthesized to create cultural safety. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what's going on in my life, but I want to contribute to something if it's going to make things better. So I'm a contributor of that. So I'm one of many other cultural safety champions, and we're all trying to create a safe place and also a system to challenge inequalities. Primarily, it was for our women, because a report called the Embrace Report came out in 2019 that says that Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth as a consequence of childbirth and pregnancy than white women, and Asian women twice as more likely. But the statistic is very, very shocking. And it's like, how did that happen? We've got the NHS, we're brilliant, we're wonderful. Actually, we're not that wonderful. We are very racist. And like I said, it takes documentation to prove it. Even though that documentation's been around for 40 years, it's only when something like this happens. That happened before George Floyd. When George Floyd happened, then it got picked up, and the speed for it got picked up, the media got picked up, the publicity got picked up. which to me makes me a bit sad that we needed something like George Floyd to strike that humanity in us. Why didn't we have that humanity in the first place? But that's a proof how documentation is just not enough, that we need that that shared common humanity to really make things different, change and make things different in the future. So I'm proud that there are at least communications happening. Whether these come into fruition, I don't know. My trust has been broken several times, and all I know is I just have to keep trying. Just yesterday, when I was looking after a lady, she proved to me why I wanted to be a midwife and why my work is the work for me. And it was because at the end, she said to me, Fatima, you've been amazing. If you were not here, I would have had a C-section. I know this is not, I'm so glad you had a career change, Fatima. I know this work for you is not just a tick box exercise. And for her to know that it means so much to me to to do the best for her in her most vulnerable and emotional and spiritual time of her life, to know that I'm not just doing a job, that I'm doing communal work for the betterment of her family and hence her life, because birth is such a pivotal time in your life. If you can make that good, then you can make that family good. You can create societal stability. In a and for her to know that it wasn't just a tick box, that made me feel so proud that I had managed to communicate that in my work, in my actions, not just in my speech. I would want white people to understand what it means to be white. I would want there to be more people of color in seniority. I would want their challenges and their difficulties to have been acknowledged. I want I want systems to be in place so that we can stop systemic racism happening in the first place. So we can acknowledge that it starts in education. Actually, we need government will and political will and government funding in areas of most deprivation, so that children are in good schools, not just going to the school that's local, but make all of the schools good. That would be great, so that we have whole children, not just not children having faced difficulties from the age of 7, or it starts very young. So if we have societal changes which mean that we have confident young people feeling and knowing that they can achieve what they want, without obstructions that white people don't face. And then if we have universities that understand how white the default of their education system is, like we don't know how to pick up chickenpox in black skin because we don't have a picture of it. We're always taught of white skin, what rashes look like on white skin, what does jaundice look like on white skin. So it would be good to have that inclusivity, but not just inclusivity, it's removing whiteness as the standard. I also want there to be systems in place so that people of color and staff of color are supported by I forgot the word, not a platform, but a panel of representatives to so that when they are having the courage to speak out, they're not doing it by themselves, and that they have someone to emotionally guide them in that journey, because it's such a difficult journey to meander. And I want there to be open and comfortable spaces and conversations to talk about race, but not just race, to talk about your spiritual needs. And I'm not talking about like heaven or hell or God or no God, but what it means to live by your values, and what it means to live life wholefully, and to appreciate time, to appreciate beauty, to appreciate the emotional aspects of work, whether that be midwifery or any other type of work. My thoughts are that colonialism is very much present in the NHS and in all of our institutions today. we can't have just owned like half the world, not even half the world. There was never a place where the sun didn't set on the British Empire. And that only finished about 70 years ago. And we're still acting like colonial powers, like we're not giving back artifacts in the British Museum to the countries that they were stolen from. And this is reflective of how we still think that we are entitled to other people's possessions, other people's countries, other people's identities. And it's to me it's so vivid when you challenge colonialism in institutions and they deny it. And they think that they're such a post-racial society, but they're really not. You can't go from owning the world for a couple hundred years and suddenly be such a racially equal place. It doesn't work that way. So I see colonialism in healthcare by expecting black and brown healthcare staff to sacrifice themselves. I'm not saying white staff weren't either, but black and brown staff not traditionally, but systemically live in places of poverty, live in multi-generational households. They are more vulnerable. And that vulnerability is not considered, it's not adequately catered for, and we're not challenging or critiquing the systems that put them in that vulnerability in the first place, hence colonialism. What gives me strength to continue fighting for justice is knowing that if I didn't fight for justice, I wouldn't be in line with my values. And if I wasn't in line with my values, I wouldn't be in line with my soul. If I wasn't in line with my soul, my spirit would be at the start of its decline and its suicide. And you end up not respecting yourself. So I'm doing this. I fight for justice so that I can hold myself with integrity, that I am working with my values, because at the end of the day, I'm going to die. And I don't want to come to the end of my life thinking I didn't fight for justice. I didn't live according to my values. I didn't practice what I preached. Because in the grand scheme of things, there's a not a bigger universe. There's a bigger world than just my life. There's other people's lives as well. And if I can leave this world and make other people leave this world having made it a bit better, then I have done something really good with my life, and hence I have meaning to it.